I'm Lisa, 30, and my daughter Sophie is the light of my life. She's 11, full of energy and the sweetest person I know. My relationship with my parents, John and Elizabeth, and my brother Alex has always been complicated. When I left Sophie with them for a weekend seminar, my heart was filled with unease. I never imagined that 2 days later I'd be sitting in a medical center room, watching my daughter recover from an operation on a leg she had been forced to walk on for 2 hours. We didn't have time to go to the urgent care, they said, but before I continue, where are you watching this from? Leave a comment below, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear how I managed this heartbreaking betrayal. Being a single mom isn't easy, but Sophie and I have found a rhythm. After my divorce from Adam 4 years ago, I've dedicated myself to giving Sophie the love and security she deserves. Adam's job takes him all over the country, and while he sends regular child support, his visits are few and far between. Sophie understands this, always mature beyond her years. But I've worked extra hard to fill the gap and be both mother and father to her. My relationship with my own parents has never been simple. John and Elizabeth Taylor live in a beautiful lakeside house about 1.5 hours away from our apartment in the city. It's the kind of place Sophie adores, with its charming cabin, private dock, and scenic trails. But behind that picture-perfect exterior lies a colder truth. Growing up, I was never quite enough for them. John, a retired doctor, always expected perfection. Elizabeth, a former school principal, scrutinized every decision I made. Their criticism was endless. My grades. Straight A's were never enough. It's my casual appearance, my choice to teach instead of going into medicine. All were met with disapproval. Even now, at 30, with a master's degree and a stable job as a high school teacher, I still feel like a 16-year-old, inadequate and uncertain around them. And then there's Alex, my younger brother by 2 years. He could do no wrong. He was the golden child, always praised, always above reproach. Alex followed in John's footsteps and became a doctor. When he became an orthopedic surgeon, you'd have thought he'd discovered a cure for cancer. Despite all this, I kept in touch because Sophie deserved to know her grandparents and uncle. They loved her in their own way, and she adored them right back. She enjoyed fishing with Grandpa John, baking with Grandma Elizabeth, and listening to Uncle Alex's hospital tales. I did my best to shield her from their subtle criticisms, the same ones that had chipped away at my confidence over the years. And for the most part, I succeeded. So when my principal chose me to represent our school at an educational conference in Chicago, it's a possible step toward the department head position one had been working toward. I reluctantly arranged for Sophie to stay with my parents for the weekend. It's just 2 days, Sophie said, packing her favorite books. At 11, she was in that perfect in-between stage. Still my little girl, but beginning to blossom into her own person. Her brown hair was tied back in a neat ponytail, and her bright eyes sparkled with excitement. I'll be fine, plus, Grandpa said. We might go hiking to the waterfall. I double-checked her suitcase, adding an extra sweater. Minnesota in March could be unpredictable. I know you'll be fine, sweetie. Just remember to take your allergy medicine every morning and don't let Grandpa give you too much candy before bed. I know, Mom, she said, rolling her eyes playfully. We've done this before, and we had, but never for more than a day. Something about this trip felt different. Maybe it was the importance of the seminar, or maybe it was the way Alex had suddenly decided to join us last minute. He and his wife Megan were having issues, so he decided to stay at our parents' house to clear his head. His presence always shifted the family dynamic, making John and Elizabeth even more dismissive of me. On Friday afternoon, I drove Sophie to the lakeside house. The property was stunning. In early spring, the trees were starting to bud, and the lake peeked through the woods. It's a cozy A-frame cabin built by my father before I was born, stood as picturesque as ever. My parents greeted us on the porch with Elizabeth immediately fussing over Sophie's jacket. "This isn't warm enough for the weather," she said, ushering Sophie inside. "I've laid out some clothes for the weekend." I bit my tongue, but Sophie gave me a look that said, "It's okay, I'll handle Grandma. John barely acknowledged. Me, his attention fixed on telling Sophie about the hiking trail he'd mapped out for Saturday. The waterfall is stunning this time of year, with the snowmelt. You'll need proper shoes, not those flimsy sneakers. I packed her hiking boots. Dad, I said, setting Sophie's suitcase in the guest room. They're the ones you and Mom got her for Christmas. He nodded distractedly. Alex is bringing steaks for dinner tomorrow. He should be here around noon. Of course, Alex's arrival was the highlight of the weekend. Before leaving, I pulled my mother aside in the kitchen. Sophie sometimes gets homesick at night. If she needs to call me, even late, please let her. Elizabeth waved dismissively. Lisa, we've raised children before. Successfully, I might add. The implication that I somehow hadn't been raised successfully wasn't lost on me. Sophie will be fine. We don't coddle her like you do. I swallowed my retort. Also, she's been having some knee pain from soccer. If it flares up, there's ibuprofen in her toiletry bag. John was a surgeon for 35 years and Alex is a doctor. I think we can handle a little knee pain. Her tone was clipped and final. When Alex arrived as I was preparing to leave, he barely spared me a greeting before sweeping Sophie into a bear hug. There's my favorite niece, ready for an adventure weekend with the cool uncle. Sophie laughed, and I forced a smile. Alex had always been good with Sophie, if somewhat overbearing. His gift-giving was excessive, his stories exaggerated, his entire persona with her performative, but Sophie adored him. Drive safe, Lisa, was all he said to me as I hugged Sophie goodbye. Be good, sweetie. Call me tonight before bed, okay? I whispered to Sophie, I love you more than anything. Love you too, Mom. Don't worry so much. Your seminar is going to be amazing. As I drove away, I watched Sophie in my rearview mirror, waving enthusiastically from between my stern-faced parents and my smirking brother. That image would haunt me later. My bright, trusting daughter surrounded by the three people who would betray her so profoundly. The Chicago seminar started well. My presentation on innovative literacy techniques for diverse learners was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. And Friday's keynote speeches provided valuable networking opportunities. Still, I found myself checking my phone frequently, smiling at Sophie's occasional texts about the banana pancakes Grandma made or the woodpeckers she spotted near the dock. Friday evening, I called as promised, but no one answered. I tried 3 times over 2 hours, growing increasingly concerned. Finally, around 9:30 p.m., my father called back. Sophie is already asleep, he said curtly. We had a busy day getting the boat ready for summer, and she was exhausted. Could you wake her? I promised I'd say goodnight. Lisa, don't be ridiculous. Fada needs rest, not to be disturbed because you're feeling insecure about being away. I swallowed my frustration. Can you just have her call me first thing tomorrow? We're hiking early. She'll call you when we get back. Before I could protest, he hung up. Typical John behavior, deciding what was best for everyone without consultation. I tried texting Sophie directly, but the message remained undelivered. I reasoned that the lake house's spotty cell service was to blame and tried to focus on reviewing my presentation notes. What I didn't know then, what Sophie would later recount to me through tears in a medical center bed, was what Saturday would bring. According to Sophie, the morning began pleasantly enough. Alex arrived before breakfast, bringing donuts and an excessive enthusiasm for the day's hike. John had mapped an ambitious trail that looped from the property to the waterfall and back, about 7 miles total. Sophie was excited but nervous about the distance. Maybe we should do the shorter trail, she'd suggested timidly over breakfast. Mom and I usually do the 3-mile one. Your mother coddles you, John had responded. You're old enough for a real hike. Besides, Alex wants to see the Upper Falls. And so, it was decided. What Sophie wanted or felt comfortable with was irrelevant. What Alex wanted was the priority. A family dynamic I knew all too well. They set out around 9 a.m. Sophie wore the proper hiking boots I'd packed, along with jeans and layers, as the spring day promised to warm up. Her backpack contained water, trail mix, and her phone, which my mother promptly confiscated. No electronics in nature, Elizabeth declared. This is family time. The first half of the hike went smoothly. They reached the waterfall by noon, where they ate the sandwiches Elizabeth had packed. Sophie described how beautiful the falls were, swollen with spring runoff, cascading dramatically over moss-covered rocks. It was on their return journey, about a mile from the waterfall, that everything went wrong. The path narrowed as it followed a stream, becoming rocky and slick with spray from the rushing water. Sophie was careful, but John and Alex set a brisk pace ahead, with Elizabeth following close behind them. No one was watching when Sophie's foot slipped on a moss-covered rock. Her leg twisted awkwardly as she fell, and she heard a sickening crack. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. Sophie screamed, a sound that echoed through the forest. My family rushed back to find her crumpled on the trail, clutching her right leg, tears streaming down her face. "It's broken," she gasped. "Something snapped. I heard it." Alex knelt beside her, his medical training finally useful. He examined her leg, which was already beginning to swell. "Looks like a tibia fracture," he concluded. "We need to get her to an urgent care." Sophie felt a momentary relief. Uncle Alex was a doctor. He would help her, they would call her mom, me, and everything would be okay. But then John checked his watch. "We have dinner with the Harrisons at 7, he reminded Elizabeth. "We'd never make it to the medical center and back in time." "Can't we cancel?" Sophie asked, through her tears. "It really hurts." Elizabeth's lips thinned. "The Harrisons are your grandfather's oldest friends. We've had this dinner planned for months." Sophie looked to Alex, hoping her uncle, the doctor, would insist on proper medical care. Instead, he shrugged. "It's probably just a hairline fracture. Not a big deal. We can ice it at the house and reassess." "But how will I get back?" Sophia asked, the pain making her dizzy. "I can't walk on this." "The solution my family devised still makes my blood boil when I think about it." John fashioned a makeshift walking stick from a branch. Alex declared that walking it off might actually be good. "Weight-bearing fractures heal better," he claimed. A dangerously oversimplified medical assertion. And Elizabeth simply stated that they didn't have time for dramatics. No one carried her. No one went for help. Instead, they forced my 12-year-old daughter to walk 3 hours back to the house on a broken leg. Sophie described the journey as a blur of pain. Every step was agony. She cried until she had no tears left, then continued in silent suffering. She begged for her phone to call me. They refused. She asked to rest. They allowed only brief stops, hurrying her along with reminders of the precious dinner engagement. By the time they reached the house, Sophie's leg was grotesquely swollen, her skin mottled with bruising from knee to ankle. She couldn't put any weight on it at all anymore. So Alex and John half-carried her the final quarter-mile dot at the house. Their treatment consisted of ice, ibuprofen, and elevating her leg on pillows in the guest room. Elizabeth brought her soup and crackers, then left her alone while they all showered and dressed for dinner. "We'll only be gone a few hours," my mother told her. "There's water by your bed and the TV remote. Try to rest." Sophie, in excruciating pain and abandonment, watched through the window as all three of them drove away to dinner, leaving her completely alone with a broken leg in a house 2 miles from the nearest neighbor. She tried using the landline to call me, only to discover it was dead. A tree had fallen on the line earlier that week, a detail my family had conveniently forgotten to mention. With no cell phone and no way to call for help, Sophie lay in bed, alternating between tearful agony and stretches of exhausted unconsciousness. Meanwhile, I was texting and calling repeatedly from Chicago, growing increasingly frantic as Saturday evening stretched into night with no word from my family or daughter. By Sunday morning, I was beside myself with worry. No calls, no texts. Nothing since Friday afternoon. I'd left dozens of messages for my parents, Alex even trying their neighbors. The final session of my seminar wasn't until 2 p.m., but by 9 a.m., I'd made my decision. I informed the organizers of a family emergency, packed my bags, and hit the road for the 3-hour drive back to Minnesota. The entire drive. My mind cycled through scenarios ranging from mundane dead batteries, poor reception, to catastrophic. By the time I turned onto the gravel road leading to my parents' property, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. The first thing I noticed was that all 3 cars were their John's SUV, Elizabeth's sedan, and Alex's ostentatious sports car. At least they were home. I pulled up to the house around noon, the gravel crunching beneath my tires. No one came out to greet me. I walked in without knocking. It was still my childhood home, after all. The scene in the main room was surreal, normal. My parents and Alex were playing Scrabble at the coffee table, coffee mugs and sundae pastries, arranged neatly nearby. All 3 looked up in surprise. "Lisa, we weren't expecting you until tonight," my mother said, her tone suggesting I'd committed some social faux pas by arriving early. "I've been trying to reach you for nearly 2 days," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "Where's Sophie?" "Still sleeping?" Alex replied casually. "She's fine, just taking it easy after a little tumble on the trail yesterday." The dismissive way he said it, a little tumble, sent alarm bells ringing. What tumble? What happened? My father sighed, setting down his Scrabble tiles. "She slipped on some rocks and hurt her leg. Nothing serious. We've been keeping an eye on it. If it's nothing serious, why didn't anyone call me?" I demanded. "Why hasn't she called me?" "That landline's down," my mother offered. "And cell service is spotty up here." "Where's her phone?" I demanded. "I have it," my mother admitted. She was getting too dependent on it. We wanted her to enjoy the weekend without technology. I didn't wait to hear more. I strode toward the guest room, my parents and Alex, trailing behind, still offering excuses and assurances that I was overreacting. The sight of Sophie stopped me cold in the doorway. My daughter lay on the bed, her face pale and drawn with pain. Her right leg, propped on pillows, was swollen to nearly twice its normal size, with bruising so dark it looked almost black in places. Her eyes, rimmed red from crying, widened when she saw me. "Mom," she whispered, fresh tears spilling. "You came early." I was at her side in an instant. "What happened, sweetheart?" "What did they do to you?" Through broken sobs. Sophie told me about the fall, the crack she'd heard, and the agonizing 3-hour walk back to the house. How they'd left her alone, too, attend their dinner. How no one believed how bad it was, how much it hurt all night long. As she spoke, I gently examined her leg, my horror mounting. The misalignment was visible even to my untrained eye. This wasn't a sprain or a minor fracture. This was serious. I turned to face my family, who stood clustered in the doorway. "You made her walk on this for 3 hours, and then you left her alone. We gave her pain medication." My mother defended weakly. 2 ibuprofen. Sophie corrected in a small voice. Alex said it was just a hairline fracture, my father added, gesturing to my brother as if his medical degree made this neglect acceptable. Alex shrugged. "It looked minor yesterday. Besides, kids are resilient." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "She needs a medical center." "No, don't be dramatic, Lisa," my father said. "If you'd let me look at it." "No," I cut him off, my voice deadly. "Calm, you've done enough. I'm taking my daughter to the urgent care." I gathered Sophie in my arms, ignoring my family's continued protests. She was lighter than I expected, or perhaps adrenaline made her weight insignificant. I carried her to my car, my parents and Alex following with a bizarre mixture of defensive excuses and suddenly helpful suggestions. "Should we come with you?" my mother asked as I carefully settled Sophie in the back seat, arranging pillows to elevate her leg. "No," I answered without looking at her. "You've done enough." The 20-minute drive to the nearest medical center was tense, with Sophie's whimpers each time the car hit a bump. I called ahead so they'd be ready for us. By the time we arrived, Sophie's pain had escalated to the point where she could barely speak. The emergency room staff took one look at her leg and rushed us into a treatment room. The doctor, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Rivera, ordered immediate x-rays and pain medication. When she returned with the results, her expression was grave. "Sophie has a displaced tibial shaft fracture," she explained, showing me the x-rays. "See this angle here? The bone has completely broken and shifted. What concerns me most is the delay in treatment. Walking on this injury has caused soft tissue damage and increased the risk of complications." "What kind of complications?" I asked, my throat tight. "Compartment syndrome is our immediate concern. That's increased pressure within the muscle compartment that can damage nerves and blood vessels. There's also risk of infection, improper healing, and long-term mobility issues." "What does she need?" I asked. Dr. Rivera said firmly, "We need to realign the bone and stabilize it with screws and a plate. Our orthopedic surgeon is being called in. He'll be here shortly." Within the hour, I nodded, trying to process everything. And if this had been treated immediately after the injury? Dr. Rivera's expression told me everything. A clean break might have needed just a cast. Walking on it changed everything. As Sophie was prepared for surgery, I sat beside her bed, holding her hand. The weight of what my family had done, the unnecessary pain they'd caused, the complications they'd created settled over me like a suffocating blanket. I trusted them with my most precious person, and they had utterly failed us both. When my parents and Alex appeared in the doorway of the treatment room an hour later, I felt nothing but cold, crystalline rage. The pediatric orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Layton, arrived promptly. After examining Sophie and reviewing her x-rays, he confirmed what Dr. Rivera had told us. Sophie would need emergency surgery to repair the displaced fracture and address the soft tissue damage caused by walking on the broken bone. "We'll need to place a titanium rod and several screws," he explained. "In a child her age, we typically try to avoid such invasive measures, but the displacement is severe and there's significant soft tissue involvement." Sophie squeezed my hand, her eyes wide with fear. "Will it hurt?" Dr. Layton's expression softened. "You'll be asleep for the surgery and we'll manage your pain carefully afterward. The good news is that young bones heal remarkably well with proper care and physical therapy. You should regain full function." As they prepared to take Sophie to surgery, I kissed her forehead, promising to be there when she woke up. The moment they wheeled her away, I turned to face my family, who had been hovering awkwardly by the door. "Lisa, don't you think you're overreacting?" my father began. "Surgery seems extreme. If they'd just let me examine her properly." "Stop," I said, my voice low and controlled. "Just stop. We didn't know it was this serious," my mother interjected. "Sophie didn't indicate it was this bad. She was crying in pain for hours," I countered. "She heard the bone break." "Kids exaggerate," Alex said with a dismissive wave. "I see it all the time in my practice. They come in thinking they're dying when it's just a sprained ankle." Something in me snapped. "This isn't just anything, Alex. This is a displaced tibial fracture with soft tissue damage. You're an orthopedic surgeon. You should have recognized the severity immediately in a proper examination setting. Maybe," he defended, "out on a trail with limited visibility. Then you should have erred on the side of caution." I was shouting now, drawing concerned looks from the nursing staff. I lowered my voice. "You should have carried her out, called for help, done literally anything other than force her to walk for 3 hours on a broken leg." "We had dinner plans," my mother said weakly. I stared at her incredulously. "Dinner plans? You left my injured minor child alone in an empty house with no working phone because of dinner plans." "The Harrisons are very important to your father," she explained, as if this clarified everything. "More important than Sophie's health then? Her safety now." Lisa, my father interjected, using the condescending tone that had silenced me throughout my childhood. You're being emotional. These doctors are probably overreacting to cover themselves legally. I've seen it countless times. I closed my eyes, memories flooding back. My sprained wrist at 10 that my father declared just bruised until the school. Nurse sent me 4 x-rays 3 days later. The time Alex broke our neighbor's window, but I was punished because Alex wouldn't do that. The consistent, persistent pattern of minimizing my concerns while elevating Alex's opinions. Sophie could have permanent damage, I said quietly. She's 12 years old and may need physical therapy for months because you couldn't miss a dinner party, because you couldn't admit that maybe, just maybe, her pain was real and significant. She'll be fine, Alex insisted. Kids bounce back. Remember when I broke my arm climbing that oak tree? Dad said it right there in the kitchen, he added. And you received proper follow-up care the next day? I reminded him. You weren't forced to climb back down the tree on your broken arm. The waiting room fell silent. A nurse approached cautiously. Miss Taylor, your daughter is in surgery now. It should take about 2 hours. There's a private waiting area for families if you'd prefer. I nodded gratefully. Thank you. As I gathered my purse to follow her, my mother stepped forward. We'll wait with you. I stopped, turning to face all 3 of them. In that moment, with Sophie in surgery, I saw my family with complete clarity, perhaps for the first time. These people, bound to me by blood, had repeatedly shown me who they were. I just hadn't been willing to believe it until they endangered my daughter. No, I said calmly, you won't. Lisa, be reasonable. My father started. Reasonable? I laughed, a hollow sound. Is it reasonable to make Sophie walk 3 miles on a broken leg? Is it reasonable to leave her alone in pain without a working phone? Is it reasonable to prioritize a social engagement over a child's health and safety? We made a judgment call, Alex defended. It's easy to criticize in hindsight. A judgment call, I repeated. Well, I'm making one now. I want you to leave. My mother's face crumpled. But Sophie will have me here when she wakes up. She doesn't need to see the people who ignored her pain and caused her additional suffering. You're being dramatic, my father said dismissively. As usual, maybe I am, I conceded. But I'm also her mother. And right now, that means I need to protect her Yvonne from family. Especially from family. Alex stepped forward, his expression hardening. You know, this attitude is exactly why Adam left. You always blow everything out of proportion. The low blow was meant to hurt me, to make me back down as I had so many times before. Instead, I felt an odd sense of calm. Sophie is having emergency surgery because you, a trained orthopedic surgeon, decided a dinner party was more important than properly treating her broken leg. That's not blowing things out of proportion. That's stating facts. I met his gaze steadily. Now, please leave, all of you. My father's face reddened with anger. If we leave now, don't expect us to come back. 'Twas meant as a threat, but it felt like freedom. I don't, I said as they stormed out, muttering about ingratitude and overreaction. I felt no satisfaction, only a bone-deep weariness and concern for Sophie. The surgery lasted nearly 3 hours. Longer than expected due to the complexity of the repair. When Dr. Layton finally came to update me, his expression was cautiously optimistic. We've stabilized the fracture with a titanium rod and screws, he explained. There was significant soft tissue damage that needed attention, but we're confident we've addressed all the issues. Sophie is in recovery now, and doing well? Long-term prognosis? I asked. With proper follow-up care and physical therapy, she should regain full function. She need to be non-weight-bearing for at least 6 weeks, followed by a graduated return to activities. The hardware may need to be removed in a year or so once healing is complete. I nodded, relief washing over me. Can I see her? Sophie was groggy from anesthesia when I entered the recovery room. her right leg immobilized in a temporary splint until the swelling subsided enough for casting. Her face brightened slightly when she saw me. "Mom," she whispered, "you're still here." I took her hand, careful of the IV line. "Of course I am, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere." She glanced around the room. "Where's Grandma and Grandpa? And Uncle Alex?" I hesitated, uncertain how much to share in her fragile state. "They had to go, honey. But don't worry about that now. You just focus on resting." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "They didn't believe me, Mom. I told them how bad it hurt, but they said I was being dramatic. Uncle Alex said I was fine." Swallowed hard against my own tears. "I believe you, Sophie. I always will. And I'm so sorry this happened." As she drifted back to sleep, still holding my hand, I made a silent promise to both of us. This would never happen again. No matter what it took, I would protect her, even if that meant cutting ties with a family who had betrayed us both so profoundly. The days following Sophie's surgery were a blur of medical center rooms, medication schedules, and logistical challenges. Sophie remained hospitalized for 3 days, her leg now encased in a temporary splint while the swelling subsided. I slept in the uncomfortable recliner beside her bed, leaving only to shower in the medical center's family facilities and make necessary calls to my school and Sophie's. My principal was understanding about my extended absence, especially once I explained the circumstances. Sophie's teachers arranged to send assignments so she wouldn't fall behind our community. The real one, made of friends and colleagues rather than blood relations, rallied around us. My parents and Alex made no attempt to visit during Sophie's medical center stay. Instead, they launched a campaign of texts and voicemails that cycled between defensive justification and accusatory deflection. My mother claimed they were giving us space. Our father insisted the doctors had overreacted with unnecessary surgery. Alex suggested that Sophie's recovery would have been simpler if I hadn't rushed her to the urgent care and let him handle it. I read these messages with a strange detachment, as if they were artifacts from a past life. Each one only confirmed that I'd made the right decision in asking them to leave. The only family member who reached out with genuine concern was my Aunt Eleanor, my father's sister. She and my father had been estranged for years, a situation I now understood with crystal clarity. When she called, after somehow hearing about Sophie's injury, her first words were, "What can I do to help?" Eleanor lived 3 hours away but offered to drive up the following weekend. "I'm not surprised John and Elizabeth handled this poorly," she said bluntly. "They did the same thing when you broke your collarbone at soccer camp. Told you to tough it out for 2 days before your coach insisted on an X-ray." I had almost forgotten that incident, buried beneath years of similar dismissals. I thought that was normal. I admitted that all families worked that way. "It's not normal," Eleanor assured me. "It's neglect, plain and simple." When we finally brought Sophie home from the medical center, our apartment presented new challenges. The third-floor walk-up that had never bothered us before now seemed like an insurmountable obstacle. Sophie couldn't put any weight on her right leg for at least 6 weeks, meaning she needed crutches to navigate even the simplest tasks. That first night home, I helped her bathe, change, and settle into bed, both of us exhausted from the ordeal. As I tucked her in, Sophie asked the question I'd been dreading. "Are we ever going to see Grandma and Grandpa again? Or Uncle Alex?" Sat on the edge of her bed, choosing my words carefully. "I don't know, sweetheart. What they did, making you walk on your broken leg, leaving you alone when you were hurt, that wasn't okay. It wasn't safe." Sophie nodded solemnly. "I kept thinking you would have believed me. You would have taken me to the doctor right away. Always," I promised her. "I will always believe you when you're hurt, and I will always make sure you get the care you need. Grandpa said I was being dramatic. Like you." Her voice was small, uncertain. "Is that bad, being like you?" My heart broke a little at her words. "No, Sophie, listen to me. You were not being dramatic. Your leg was broken, badly broken. The doctors confirmed that. And being like me, that's the greatest compliment I could ever receive, 'cause you are kind and brave and honest to everything I aspire to be. She seemed to accept this, but I could see the hurt lingering in her eyes. Not just physical pain, but the deeper wound of betrayal by people she trusted and loved. The practical aspects of Sophie's recovery proved challenging. Our health insurance covered much of the surgery and hospital stay, but the deductible, co-pays, and upcoming physical therapy sessions would strain our budget. I applied for a medical leave from work, okay, but it would only cover a portion of my salary. My friend Melissa, a fellow English teacher, organized a meal train. Another colleague, Tom, lived in our building and offered to help carry Sophie up. And down the stairs when necessary, my ex-husband Adam called from Seattle, horrified by what had happened, and arranged to have groceries delivered weekly. The most difficult conversation was with Adam about my parents' role in Sophie's injury. He had always liked them, finding my complaints about their behavior exaggerated. Now, hearing what they'd done, he was stunned into silence. Jesus. Lisa, he finally said, I thought you were just being sensitive all those years. I had no idea they were capable of something like this. Neither did I admitted. Not to this extent. You want me to fly out? I can take some time off. Offer surprised me. Adam hadn't taken time off for Sophie since our divorce. Oh, but thank you for offering. We're managing. But maybe you could FaceTime her more regularly. She could use the extra support right now. Of course, anything she needs. He paused. And what about your parents? What are you going to do about them? It was the question I'd been wrestling with since the medical center. What do you do when the people who should love and protect you the most demonstrate such callous disregard? How do you reconcile the bonds of family with the need to protect yourself and your child? I don't know yet, I told him, honestly, but I know I can't let them hurt her again. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, researching medical neglect by grandparents and cutting ties with toxic family. The search results were overwhelming, but a link to a support group for adults estranged from parents caught my attention. I joined immediately. That night, I consulted with a family law attorney, Patricia Reyes, who specialized in child protection cases. I explained the situation, showing her Sophie's medical records and the text messages from my family afterward. What they did constitutes medical neglect, Patricia confirmed. As Sophie's mother, you have every right to restrict their access to her. If you want to pursue legal action, we could potentially file for a restraining order based on the harm they caused. I don't think it will come to that, I said. They're more likely to disown me than try to force contact, but I want to understand my options. She nodded. Document everything. Save those texts. Keep records of Sophie's medical treatment and recovery. If they do attempt to force contact or undermine your parental authority, you'll be prepared. As Sophie began her long recovery process, the magnitude of what had happened continued to unfold. Simple tasks like showering or getting to school became logistical operations. Sophie, with the resilience of youth, adapted to crutches and developed impressive upper body strength, but the psychological impact was harder to measure. She began having nightmares about falling and being abandoned in the woods. She grew anxious when I was out of sight for too long. When my mother sent her a cheerful get well soon card with no acknowledgement of what they'd done. Sophie stared at it for a long time before quietly asking me to throw it away. They don't think they did anything wrong, do they? She asked. No, sweetheart, they don't. Some people find it very hard to admit when they've made mistakes, she considered. I don't want to be like that. I want to be able to say I'm sorry when I mess up. In that moment, I recognized that despite the trauma and pain, Sophie was learning valuable lessons about accountability, empathy, and self-worth, lessons my parents had never managed to grasp. As the days passed, my parents and Alex's messages grew increasingly hostile. They accused me of turning Sophie against them, of overreacting to a minor incident, of being an ungrateful daughter after all they'd done for me. Not once did any of them acknowledge the severity of Sophie's injury or expressed genuine remorse for their role in it. For days after bringing Sophie home from the medical center, I made my decision. It wasn't impulsive or emotional, but the measured conclusion of a lifetime of evidence. My family had shown me repeatedly who they were. It was time I believed them. For days after bringing Sophie home from the medical center, I sat at our kitchen table with a legal pad, Sophie's medical records, and a sense of calm determination. My daughter was napping in her room, the morning's physical therapy session having exhausted her. Her temporary splint had been replaced with a full cast, bright blue at her request. Already accumulating signatures from the few visitors we welcomed, I began drafting a letter, not an angry tirade or emotional plea, but a clear factual account of what had happened and what would happen next. One included copies of Sophie's x-rays and the surgical report, with key phrases highlighted: displaced tibial fracture, soft tissue damage due to walking on the injury, delayed medical treatment complicating recovery. To my parents, I wrote, John and Elizabeth, I'm providing Sophie's medical records so you can fully understand the severity of her injury and the consequences of your decisions last weekend. As her mother, I trusted you to keep her safe. That trust has been irreparably broken. Sophie will require extensive physical therapy and may need additional surgery to remove the hardware. She will miss the remainder of her soccer season and possibly the start of next year's, at 12 years old. She has experienced unnecessary pain and trauma that could have been avoided with basic compassion and appropriate medical attention. After considerable reflection, I've decided to terminate our relationship. This isn't a temporary cooling-off period or an emotional reaction. It's a necessary step to protect Sophie and myself from further harm. Effective immediately. Do not contact Sophie directly through any means. Do not contact me except through the legal representative copied on this letter. Do not visit our home or Sophie's school. Do not attempt to use other family members as intermediaries. If you violate these boundaries, I will pursue legal protection without hesitation. I don't make this decision lightly. It comes after a lifetime of dismissal, favoritism, and emotional manipulation that I allowed to continue because I believed family connections were inherently valuable. Sophie's broken leg has broken that illusion as well. Stephanie, to Alex, I wrote a similar letter, adding, as a medical professional, your failure to properly assess and advocate for Sophie's injury is particularly inexcusable. You prioritized dinner plans over a child's broken leg. Your medical license may permit you to practice, but your judgment that day revealed a fundamental lack of compassion and professional ethics that no credential can disguise. I sent the letters by certified mail, ensuring delivery confirmation. Copies went to my lawyer, Patricia, who had helped me draft the legal language. I also changed both our phone numbers and email addresses, creating new ones that only trusted friends and colleagues would receive. Sophie watched me place the letters in the mailbox outside our apartment building. Her expression was solemn beyond her years. Is this forever? She asked, as we made our slow way back up the stairs, her on crutches, me carrying her backpack. I don't know, I answered honestly. Right now, we need space to heal. You physically, both of us emotionally. Someday, if they can truly understand what they did and take responsibility, maybe things could be different. But that would require them to change in ways they've never shown the capacity for. She nodded thoughtfully. I'm sad, but also relieved. Is that weird? Not at all. It's exactly how I feel too. The responses came quickly and predictably. My father's lawyer contacted Patricia with veiled threats about my mental stability and parental alienation. My mother sent a tearful voicemail to my school office, the only number she still had, begging to speak to Sophie just for a minute. Alex sent a scathing email to my new address, how he found it, I'll never know, accusing me of professional slander and threatening legal action of his own. None of them acknowledged the harm they'd caused. Patricia handled the legal threats efficiently, responding with copies of Sophie's medical records and statements from her doctors about the impact of delayed treatment. The threats quieted after that. Though the emotional manipulation attempts continued sporadically, meanwhile, Sophie's recovery progressed slowly but steadily. 6 weeks of non-weight bearing turned into partial weight bearing with a walking boot. Physical therapy 3 times a week helped her regain strength and mobility. Her therapist, Diane, incorporated psychological support as well, helping Sophie process the betrayal she'd experienced alongside the physical trauma. My aunt, Eleanor, became a regular presence in our lives, driving up every other weekend to help with groceries, laundry, or simply to provide adult company for me. Through her, I learned family history I'd never known, patterns of neglect and favoritism that stretched back generations. Your grandfather did the same to your father, she told me one evening as we shared tea after Sophie had gone to bed. Minimized his pain, taught him to suppress emotions, favored the son who most mimicked his stoicism. John became what he was raised to be. That explains it, I said. But it doesn't excuse it. No, she agreed. Understanding the origin of behavior doesn't obligate you to accept its continuation. As the weeks passed, we established new routines and traditions. Sunday mornings became pancake breakfasts with whatever toppings we craved. Friday nights were movie nights with takeout from local restaurants we'd never tried before. We started a 2-person book club, reading the same novels and discussing them over hot chocolate. In place of the family we'd lost, we strengthened connections with the people who showed up for us consistently. My colleagues who covered classes when Sophie had appointments. Neighbors who helped with stairs and errands, even Adam, who surprised us both by flying in for a long weekend to see Sophie and help with household projects. I'd been postponing. 3 months after surgery, Sophie returned to school full-time. Her mobility was still limited, but the walking boot allowed her independence. Her friends had been supportive throughout, visiting with homework and gossip, making her feel included despite her absence. Her teachers accommodated her needs without making her feel singled out. The support group for adults estranged from parents became an invaluable resource. Through their stories, I recognized patterns in my own upbringing that I'd normalized: the constant criticism disguised as concern, the dismissal of my feelings, the golden child scapegoat dynamic between Alex and me. I began to understand that cutting ties wasn't an act of vengeance but of self-preservation. 6 months after the incident, Sophie had her hardware removal surgery, a less invasive procedure with a quicker recovery time. By then, we had received no direct contact from my parents or Alex for nearly 3 months. Though I occasionally heard through mutual acquaintances that they were telling a very different version of events, casting themselves as victims of my unstable behavior and overprotectiveness, I found I no longer cared what they said. The truth was in Sophie's medical records, in the scar on her leg, in the therapy sessions she still attended. The truth was in our daily lives, which had grown more peaceful and authentic without the constant undercurrent of criticism and judgment. On the day Sophie was cleared to return to all normal activities, including soccer practice, we celebrated with a special dinner at her favorite restaurant. As we shared a dessert, she looked up at me with an expression of quiet contemplation. "Mom, I've been thinking about Grandma and Grandpa and Uncle Alex." My heart skipped. "What about them, sweetie?" "I don't miss them as much as I thought I would." She traced patterns in the chocolate sauce with her spoon. "Is that terrible to say?" "Not at all," I assured her. "Relationships should add value to your life, not drain it." Heaven, family relationships. "I miss the idea of them," she continued. "Like having grandparents who come to school concerts and an uncle who teaches me cool stuff. But the real them? They made me feel small, like my feelings didn't matter." "They made me feel that way too," I admitted, "for most of my life." She nodded, understanding beyond her years. "I'm glad we don't feel that way anymore." As we walked home that evening, Sophie moving confidently without crutches or limping, I realized we had both healed in ways that extended far beyond her physical recovery. We had rebuilt our sense of worth, our understanding of healthy relationships, and our definition of family. The painful incident had forced a reckoning that was long overdue. And through that crucible, we had emerged stronger not, despite the absence of my parents and brother, but because of it. 6 months after Sophie's broken leg, our lives had found a new normal. Her physical recovery had progressed remarkably well, as Dr. Layton had predicted. The second, less invasive surgery to remove the hardware had gone smoothly, leaving only a faint scar where the rod and screws had been. She'd returned to soccer, her coach easing her back with modified training sessions before clearing her for full participation. The emotional healing took longer for both of us. Sophie still occasionally had nightmares about being left alone while injured. Certain trigaza, particular tone of voice, the smell of pine forests, even the sound of Scrabble tiles clicking together could momentarily transport her back to that painful weekend. But with therapy and time, these moments grew less frequent and less intense. For me, the journey involved unlearning a lifetime of conditioned responses. I found myself anticipating criticism that no longer came, defending decisions no one was questioning, apologizing for taking up space I had every right to occupy. Breaking these habits required conscious effort and constant self-awareness. My parents hadn't given up entirely. Every few weeks, a card would arrive for Sophie, always cheerful, always avoiding any mention of what had happened, always signed with love from Grandma and Grandpa. I let Sophie decide whether to read them. Usually she didn't. They still don't get it, do they? She observed one day, holding an unopened birthday card from them. They think they can just pretend nothing happened. Some people never develop the capacity to truly acknowledge when they've hurt others, I explained. It threatens their self-image too much. That's sad, Sophie said, with genuine compassion that amazed me. It must be lonely never being able to say you're sorry. Alex had apparently moved on completely. According to my Aunt Eleanor, he told extended family that I had mental health issues and had cut everyone off for no reason. Few believed him, especially after Eleanor quietly shared the actual circumstances. But it didn't matter. Alex's inability to acknowledge his role in harming Sophie only confirmed we were better off. Without him, the most persistent attempts at contact came from my mother. She left messages with mutual friends, sent letters to my school, and even approached Sophie's soccer coach at a game. Though thankfully the coach, aware of the situation, politely but firmly refused to get involved. My mother's messages always followed the same pattern. She missed us. She loved us. She didn't understand why I was being so extreme. And couldn't we just move past this unpleasantness? Not once did she acknowledge what they had done or offer a genuine apology. I maintained the boundaries I'd established. The legal letters had done their job. None of them came to our home or tried to contact Sophie directly. But the emotional campaign continued, with my parents positioning themselves as wounded victims to anyone who would listen, through the adult Children of Toxic Parent Support Group. I learned this was a common tactic, what some members called the missing reasons. My parents genuinely couldn't comprehend why. I had cut contact because acknowledging the real reason would require them to see themselves as people who had harmed a child. That recognition was simply not compatible with their self-image. Understanding. This dynamic didn't make it easier, exactly, but it did help me stop expecting an acknowledgement that would never come. I stopped hoping for the dramatic moment of realization, the tearful apology, the healing reconciliation that movies had taught me to expect. Instead, I focused on building a life where such recognition wasn't necessary for our happiness. Sophie and I established new traditions to replace the old ones. Instead of tense holidays at my parents' lake house, we hosted small gatherings with friends in our apartment. For Thanksgiving, we volunteered at a local shelter before enjoying our own meal with Melissa and her family. Christmas became a cozy celebration just for the two of us, with a trip to a nearby resort for skiing once Sophie was fully recovered, of course. My Aunt Eleanor remained our strongest family connection, visiting regularly and sharing stories about my grandparents and great-grandparents that helped me understand the generational patterns at play through her. Sophie maintained a sense of family history and belonging without the toxic elements my parents had introduced. Perhaps the most surprising development was my relationship with Adam. Our divorce had been amicable but distant, with him pursuing his career across the country while I raised Sophie. After the incident with my parents, however, he became more present in our lives, calling Sophie regularly, visiting when he could, even helping financially with her medical expenses. Beyond his required child support, "I should have been there more," he admitted during one visit. "Seeing how your parents failed Sophie made me realize I've been failing her too, just in a different way." His honesty and willingness to change stood in stark contrast to my parents' rigid denial. It wasn't a romantic reconciliation. We were both better as co-parents than spouses, but it was a healing of a different kind of family wound. As for Sophie, she amazed me daily with her resilience and wisdom. She approached her recovery with determination, rarely complaining despite the pain and limitations she experienced. Sophie processed with a wisdom that belied her years, expressing sadness without letting it define her. "You know what's funny, Mom?" she said one evening as we took a walk around the neighborhood with our neighbor's dog, a new addition to her strength-building routine. "I think I learned more from them not being in our lives than I ever did when they were." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I learned what kind of person I don't want to be," she explained. "Someone who can't admit when they're wrong. Someone who values appearances more than people's feelings. Someone who makes others feel small just to feel big." Insight stopped me in my tracks. "That's a powerful lesson, Sophie." "Plus," she added, "I learned with the pragmatism of youth that when someone shows you who they are, you should believe them the first time. Maya Angelou said that, right?" I smiled. She nodded. She did, and she was absolutely right. That was the most profound lesson that came from our painful experience. My parents and Alex had shown me who they were, time and time again throughout my life. I had made excuses, normalized their behavior, and blamed myself anything to maintain the illusion that someday they would become the loving, supportive family I deserved. It took their mistreatment of Sophie to finally break that pattern and accept the truth. Family is not solely defined by blood. It's defined by love, respect, trust, and mutual care. Sometimes, the healthiest family is the one you choose and build, not the one you're born into. Establishing boundaries, even permanent ones, with toxic relatives isn't an act of cruelty. It's an act of self-preservation and, in my case, the protection of my child. Sophie will carry the physical scar from that weekend for life, up faint line on her leg where the bone was repaired. But the emotional scars have healed in ways I could have only hoped for, because we addressed them honestly, sought help when needed, and distanced ourselves from the source of harm. As for me, I no longer feel guilty about the estrangement from my parents and Alex. I no longer lie awake wondering if I'm the unreasonable one, the overly sensitive one, or the dramatic one. I know the truth of what happened, and I know that protecting Sophie was the only acceptable response. Some relationships can't be repaired because the other parties refuse to acknowledge the damage they've done. Some broken things are meant to stay broken. The real healing comes not from trying to force those broken pieces back together, but from carefully collecting the fragments that still have value and building something new, something healthier. Something true? Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect yourself or someone you love? How did you find the strength to follow through? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if you found this story helpful, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you can do. Thank you for listening. And remember, your worth is not determined by those who failed to value it.